How do you create well-being in communities where inequality and intolerance of diversity are major factors?
I don't know, is the answer. This is the great question of our time, isn't it?
Yeah.
This is the great question of our time, is how do you underwrite not only a tolerance of the other and of diversity, but actually a celebration, an embrace of diversity as an engine for our common development. That is the great question of our time. And I have to say, it is an issue which is under massive pressure around the world today. I mean, we don't have to name names to immediately recognize in our own environments, in what we thought of as the advanced developed societies, how much pressure this central conception around the embrace of diversity is under today. And again, I spend most of my time thinking about issues in Africa and Asia, and I can tell you this is an issue that is kind of front and center for us. So I think the answer to this question is elemental. So just 2 or 3 ideas. The first one is, I think we know one thing, which is that there are no silver bullets here. Simple and sloganeering answers to this very complex question of pluralism should almost certainly be dismissed as invalid, just as there is no silver bullet to reconciliation. It is a complex set of forces that come together over time. The second thing is, quality of life to me is central. We cannot talk about pluralism until we've talked about basic quality of life issues for the world's population, including here in Canada. The third issue is that there are some basic questions of mindset that have to be put on the table and collectively addressed. And to be simplistic about it, but I don't think, to be simple about it, but not simplistic, I think the choice is simply this. We either think of ourselves as all in this together, or that we're in it for ourselves. This is the basic choice. And as we're thinking about young people, one of the things I think for us to help nurture among young people is to understand the 2 different constellation of values that are embedded in these 2 visions of society. And for us to nurture a certain empathy around this idea that we're all in this together. If it was ever ethically tenable for us to think of ourselves as atomized, building kind of this city on a hill where we kind of build a wall of ourselves, if that was ever ethically tenable, which I don't think it was, ever, but it's easy to ignore ethics, it turns out, right? It is certainly today not practically tenable, right? So the notion that we're in it for ourselves, I don't think works today. So the first thing I think we have to be able to nurture in any pluralistic environment is the basic attitude that we're in this together. Then I think we also have to help people feel very secure in their own identity. They have to learn massively about themselves. One of the ironies, paradoxes of, I think, pluralist societies is that individual identities are very strong. We're not asking and seeking homogeneity. In fact, we're expecting and demanding a very intimate embrace of difference. It's exactly right for us to celebrate our common humanity, but with equal force, we have to celebrate our differences. We have to understand our differences. And it means that people have to have a very deep sense of their own cultural identity. And I think we have to invest massively in that, and then massively in the knowledge of people in their, of other cultures and other environments.
Excellent. So to the both of you, I'll give you a chance to get a water break. How do we ensure that all voices in community are heard equally in discussions about pluralism and reconciliation? And how can women and youth in particular gain access to places of power? Without their voices, can reconciliation truly be achieved?
Chief, please.
I just wanted to add a little
Sure.
comment to the last comment. As an Aboriginal person in this country, I remember every day what happened to us, Canadians and Aboriginal people, who were the first peoples of this land. And I've always thought about, I wonder if we've grown enough to avoid the things that happen between Aboriginals and Indigenous people in this country? Have we learned enough? Have we overcome some of those isms so that we could prevent hurting each other? And so I think it's really important to consider pluralism in that context, to know that the future, whatever it is, involves all of us acknowledging our part in our society. I think what I'm afraid of is, and I've seen all of the ethnicity, you go to Toronto especially, and here in Vancouver especially, all of the ethnicity and the diversity and the difference is there. I'm always concerned about whether or not we're embracing that enough or celebrating it enough. Because if we don't, we'll have not only just an enclave of Aboriginals in dire straits, we'll have all kind of entities exercising racism against each other. And that would lead for a really, really unhealthy country. There'd be so much more brokenness and despair and even violence. So we have to give it some deep thought about who we are as Canadians. We're not the same Canadians we were 50 years ago. There were the white people, and then there were the Indians, us Aboriginal people. We're all here now. Everybody on earth is here. Every color, every race, every creed. We have to find a way to embrace each other, to nurture each other, to create understanding with each other, to have some kind of relationship between us that has meaning, so that when our children, our young people are growing up in our midst, they're all feeling like they belong to the society. That, like I said earlier, that everybody has value, everybody has purpose. And I think we have to make sure that we engage with each other, all of our difference, all of our diversity, all of our ethnicity, and we talk. You're the leaders in this room, actually. You're actually now the conscience of this new process in Canada going on called pluralism and reconciliation. So it won't be enough to be here this evening to hear a speech or a talk unless you bring this home with you and say, now it's my responsibility and duty to bring all of the voices together so that every voice is heard, every voice is valued, and that whatever we learn from each other, we begin to imbue in our lives together. So this is a really exciting time in our country, and this is an exciting time in our history. And when I look around at Canada and Canadiana, whatever it is, I'm actually optimistic that there are so many people in this country who care and want to do things, to step up to the plate and say, yeah, I'm responsible, so we're going to nurture this, whatever the future looks like. And I've never seen that before. I've never had the optimism that I have now. In spite of all of the challenges, we are now in a moment of our consciousness thinking about these very important matters. And so it's exciting to know that all of you in this room and others across this country are thinking about how we're going to make a difference and be involved and shape the future together, to have this vision together that creates whatever it is down the road that makes us Canadians who live up to the values that we espouse. I think our big problem is right now is that we have a hard time living up to that. But I think we can, with the people in this room and others across the country, begin to instill energy and focus among ourselves to challenge us to rise to the occasion of meeting what it is that we value in our country and in our lives.
If I might, I think Chief Joseph's call for us to be aware of the fragilities of our pluralism are very, very important. it seems to me that it may be the fate of living in a truly pluralist society that we have to be continually aware of its fragilities. Because in some senses, with the embrace of every horizon of diversity, the consequence is a glance at the next horizon, right? We become ever more aware of the dimensions of exclusion and inclusion in a society. We become more and more sophisticated over time. And the experience, therefore, I think, is a very kind of perpetual sense of fragility. I think it's something we have to be ready to accept as the consequence of living in a pluralist society. But it means that we must always attend to it. And therefore, a pluralist society, a truly pluralist society that's really dedicated to the embrace of diversity in all its forms, I think is a little bit like a fine piece of china, right? Both fragile and valuable. And so the first responsibility always has to be to protect and advance pluralism at home, right? To challenge ourselves, to ask the questions about inclusion and exclusion, and what are the forces of inclusion and exclusion at play today in our society. And then as leaders in the society, to resource the forces of inclusion and to starve the forces of exclusion as much as we can. And then to think hard about sharing. How does what we are doing become a resource for others? How does it allow us to exercise a certain brand of global leadership based on these values? Because it is still the case, I think, that however fragile the situation in Canada feels, it is still distinctive, maybe never more so than today in the global context. And our ability to be able to protect and advance it at home, as well as use it as a source of global leadership, to me seems very difficult and essential.
Okay, gentlemen, I'm going to move things along a little bit because I want to open up to the floor and I have a couple more questions, okay? So we'll come back to the question of youth and women, if we have a moment, to ask whether or not we can achieve reconciliation without their voices. How essential is it to have them at the table? But I'll parking lot that for a moment. This is your chance to give some advice to your wonderful audience here. Do you have words of advice for the philanthropic community in Canada on these questions of inequality and reconciliation? So I'll start with you, Chief Joseph. If you have any words. Khalil, your turn. Your turn. Back on you.
Look, I mean, I think people are involved in this room in a variety of different sectors. So, I mean, I suppose my advice would be really around the conceptual mindset that we adopt. I mean, I think in any human context is changing, right? It's always dynamic, and there are always forces at play. And I think for philanthropic foundations, for social entrepreneurs, one of the fundamental questions is to be able to understand the forces at work in any situation, and then to be able to identify the promising forces at play and the pernicious forces at play, because every society has both of those. Take any issue you're working on today, you will find forces of inclusion, for instance, forces of exclusion. The challenge becomes when the pernicious forces at play overwhelm the promising ones. And frankly, we're seeing that in many parts of the world today. And I don't think Canada can be complacent, despite economist cover stories, right? I don't think we can be complacent about it. I think what we have to be able to do is to recognize the variety of forces at play in any situation, and then to resource financially, intellectually, morally, the promising forces at play in a situation, and then to do what we can to starve the more pernicious ones. And then to hope for the best, that the promising ones over time will overwhelm whatever are the pernicious ones, because both exist in any situation. I think that's very important for us to recognize. And as a strategic matter, therefore, I think that the leaders in this room have the unique ability to play and be players in changing the balance in how these forces might be operating in any particular situation on whatever issue you're talking about and involved in. And I think in pluralist societies, we cite this all the time, that forces of inclusion and exclusion exist simultaneously, right? They are both present in every situation. So the question is, what can we do to resource the forces of inclusion so that over time they overwhelm the forces of exclusion? And this is ongoing work. It's not done and then we kind of, we can relax in quiet repose, right? This is ongoing work to identify and resource the most promising forces at play in any situation.
Oh, no, I have this similar question. I'll just frame it a little differently.
I want to answer this a little bit.
It's similar. It's similar. So it's what is one thing that philanthropy can do first or now to combat inequality and to promote reconciliation?
Oh, okay. Thank you.
I got the better question.
Well, I'm just going to repeat what I've said before. We're in a new time, this moment in history. And all of the things that I'm hearing around the country, and I travel a little bit, is the idea that we're grappling with a new force, individually and collectively, as Canadians. And this force is a force that calls us to our highest consciousness, to be really inclusive, to honor the pluralistic makeup of our country, and to think outside the box and see how we can nurture that force and support that force. And I think that there has to be, you don't mind me if I'm bold, there has to be a significant shift in the funding approach of philanthropic foundations to envision what this force is. And it can be many things to many people depending on where you live and the people who you serve. But to harness that energy of new aspirations, desiring new ways to move forward, and to make sure that it's more inclusionary than anything we've ever done before. We've done a lot of things, not just in this room, all of us as Canadians. We've done a lot of things that have been the same, old, same. And we need to, and this time in our country, begin to expand our horizons a little bit to see how we can support this idea that we are one, that we are pluralistic, and we all desire equality and inclusion. I think it's so important and so exciting for this time that we can think about this.